Hi there. Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident teacher, one who effortlessly walks around the room, shares clear cues, easily builds sequences, and speaks from your heart, sharing authentically with your students. Here on the podcast, you'll discover new and inspiring ways to share your cues and create your sequences. You'll uncover habits and frameworks all designed to empower you so that you can teach in a way that feels authentic and natural. For some episodes, I'll have a guest, and other episodes I'll share with you on my own, and in each one, you'll always get action steps and takeaways you can apply right away to your teaching. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos. You'll see a link on both of my profiles, my Stan Store link. Click it and unlock ways you can get the support you need to be the teacher of your dreams. You'll find links to the podcast, my free ebook, and other resources to help you be the best teacher you can be. You'll also find the link to my signature program, the Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, and you can see if you qualify to enroll. So with that, let's get on with today's show. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 378. I'm recording this on November 13th, 2025, and it will go live on the 17th. And I'm so glad you're here. You know, as we roll into November and December, I don't know about you, but I am definitely starting to think about how do I want to wrap up this year and what do I want to plan for next year? And I have some interesting thoughts. I've had these two programs. Well, I've had my one-on-one program for many years. And this year I introduced the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator. And if you enrolled in that, that is a shorter program. It's more of a 4-week program versus a 90-day program. But they both are built on this idea of using my 10-step anatomy blueprint to help you understand anatomy and how to share it in your cueing and in your sequencing, and how to leverage the fact that you truly understand the fundamentals of anatomy. And therefore, it helps you feel more confident as a teacher, more qualified, more, able to help your students. So I've been thinking about, maybe leaning more into the concept of shorter programming and the accelerator, kind of adding something to it to make it even better. And I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but I'd love to hear from you if you are, if you have ideas. My thought might be around having different modules that yoga teachers could purchase. So maybe a module on assisting, maybe a module on teaching privates, maybe a module on um, providing modifications. So sort of building off of the 4-week program and then giving you almost a menu of sorts that you could choose from, maybe even a module on things like building a social media presence, or starting a business, yoga business topics. So let me know. I mean, I'm literally just riffing with you right now off the top, but I just feel this draw to create something not necessarily different, but expand on what's been working in the coming year. And I really want it to be something that you really truly want. I wanted to have a high level of demand, which will demonstrate that it's really meeting your needs. So the best way for me to know what that demand is to hear from you. So send me a DM on Instagram. Let me know anything you're looking for. And as I start to get responses, I'll be able to factor that into my building plan. So with that, what I wanted to talk with you about today is I was just reminded of and thinking about different things that over the years have been stumbling blocks for me in my path. And I was thinking about some of the, I don't know, some of the fears that I've had that have held me back from going into my classes and really teaching in a way that's 100% authentically me. And even some of the things that have come up that have made me feel nervous or self-conscious. And when I was thinking about this yesterday in preparation for this episode, I recorded an Instagram reel and I shared a story, and I want to share it with you now that sort of highlights this experience. I can remember when I had started out teaching, and I was teaching for a studio that I had really wanted to teach at, and it was the first job I ever had as a yoga teacher. I had gone to the teacher training program from the studio system, and then I really worked hard as a volunteer for no pay for many months and developed a network and got my name out there and assisted classes. And then when I got hired, I really felt like I had made it. I had gotten this teaching gig that I really desired. And shortly after starting to teach at this studio, I don't exactly remember how, but a local reporter for the Boston Globe here in Boston had found out that I had left a 20-year corporate career to teach yoga full time. And she was doing a story on people who leave their corporate jobs to pursue their passion. Now, this was 2003 or 4, maybe 2005. And this was virtually unheard of at that time. Now it's more common for people to leave their corporate job and do gig work or start their own business. Of course, there's a lot of people who are affected by corporate layoffs, but I'm talking more about when you on your own with your own free will, leave a really solid career to pursue, in this case, teaching yoga. So she was writing this article and she asked me if I wanted to be part of it. And of course I did, because at that stage of my teaching career, this sort of thing in my mind was like, wow, this would be such an honor. And so she told me to meet her at the studio, the yoga studio, and she would have her photographer with her. And this just set me because it started to get me thinking, oh my God, what was I going to wear? How was I going to do my hair? What kind of makeup was I going to do? I really became fixated on my external appearance. And, long story short, the interview came out fine. But I remember the day of the interview, I was, what bag was I going to carry? Did I need to be carrying a cup of tea? Like there was all of this focus on the outside. And I was focused less on the inside. How was I going to come across? How authentic was I going to be? And this was really an opportunity for me to do that. And so I share that story because at the end of the day, what really was on my mind was fear of being judged. And that fear of being judged by people was what motivated me to try to create this particular image. And that's what I wanted to put out there in this article instead of my authentic way of being. And it also reminded me of another story where I had gotten an opportunity to teach anatomy. And this was really early in my career when I was just starting out demonstrating my expertise in anatomy and teaching anatomy. And I went to the location where the training was going to be held. I was setting up the room with the skeleton and the handouts and that sort of thing. And I was chatting with some of the people that were coming in the room, the participants. And in speaking with one of the participants, she mentioned to me that she was a physical therapist. And I remember at that moment, my heart just sank because I thought to myself, how am I going to do this training if this woman is a physical therapist? She understands anatomy so much more than me. And I got so nervous. And I had to actually excuse myself from the conversation to go into the bathroom because I just felt myself getting so hot and flushed. And, I just was really, really freaking out. And I pulled myself together and I went back out there and I taught the workshop. And at the end of the workshop, she came up to me, this woman, and she said, "Wow, that was so great." She said, "I have to tell you, obviously I understand anatomy because I'm a physical therapist, but I didn't understand anatomy as it relates to teaching yoga. And that's what I learned today. And in that moment, and this was a long time ago, and I remember it distinctly. I remember the room, I remember what the room looked like. And in that moment, I felt like I was truly doing what I was designed to do. And I also felt the extinguishing of that belief I had had in the beginning of the day when we first started talking, that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't qualified enough, that I didn't have anything of value to share to this person who I assumed knew everything. And in continuing forward and doing the training, of course, what she revealed to me was an aspect of understanding anatomy that I hadn't even thought of, especially when it's coming from someone who has medical expertise. That whole aspect of, yes, I understand the anatomy, but I don't understand how to apply it to teaching yoga. And this actually becomes one of the things that I've heard every now and again from teachers. And they'll say to me, I went to my 200-hour training, and the anatomy part was taught to us by an orthopedic surgeon or by a massage therapist or by a physical therapist. And because they weren't a yoga teacher, in addition, it was really hard to understand the anatomy. I really didn't get anything out of it. And I always think back to that story that I just told you as the reason why. Because when you're understanding or when you're learning anatomy in the context of a certain profession, that's, of course, how you're going to learn it in terms of applying it to what you're doing. So, in the case of this woman, she was learning anatomy to apply to her job as a physical therapist. But the work that we do as yoga teachers and the application of anatomy in the context of teaching yoga is a very unique skill set. And so I wanted to share those two things, especially if you're having some fears right now around different aspects of teaching. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today, is just bringing some of those fears to the surface. And I can share with you just some ideas for sort of getting you started so you can move past some of these fears and actually be out there teaching in a way that feels authentic and fun and easy. So the first thing I wanted to bring up is this idea of fear of being seen. And this fear of being seen really comes up when I talk to teachers about doing the walk and talk. Now, they won't, of course, start out by saying, I'm afraid to be seen. I feel uncomfortable when people look at me. But that oftentimes is behind it. When they go into the room, this uncomfortable feeling that comes up when everybody's looking at me, and what am I supposed to do with my arms? Where am I supposed to stand? Am I supposed to stand in front? Like, these are some of the concerns they'll bring up. Sometimes teachers will say to me, I feel like I don't want to look them directly in the eyes, but now I don't actually know where I'm supposed to be looking. And all these things will come up the more you start to experiment with doing the walk and talk. And to some degree, you'll find your own way. But the thing that I wanted to bring up is, number one, to bring that fear to the surface. And number two, to start to put yourself in your shoes of yourself when you go to a yoga class and the teacher's doing the walk and talk. You're probably not overly fixated on looking at them or judging them or any of those things that you feel students are going to be doing when you're teaching. And that's just one of the interesting things about how the mind works. We can certainly see the other side of it. Like in this case, when I go and take a class, I'm not overly fixated on looking at the teacher. But yet, when the teacher goes and teaches the class, their assumption is everybody's watching me, everybody's judging me. So, one of the ways to move past this sort of fear is simply to take the pressure off and experiment with doing the walk and talk. Not to the extent where you force yourself to do it or where you say, oh, I have to walk around the room for the entire class, but simply to say, I'm going to try over the next couple of classes to walk around more than practice with them. And over time, you'll get better and better at it. And what will actually start to happen is you'll disprove the belief to yourself by actually having 3D experiences in the live moments of walking around and realizing I can actually allow myself to be seen. And I actually enjoy having um, more of an ability to see my students, and I have more energy. I can see how my cues are working. You'll start to appreciate all the advantages of walking around that were never available to you before. But it's not the kind of habit you can break by willpower or forcing yourself. What I've found works with yoga teachers is to just simply think of it as an experiment, something you're going to experiment doing in a different way than you're currently doing it. And really, what's there is that belief, and the belief is where the fear lies. And so, over time, as you do more and more of the walk and talk style, what you're actually doing is you're disproving the belief and you're extinguishing the fear. So that's one of the ones I wanted to bring up. And that's more of a deeper kind of emotional fear, right? Fear of being seen. So let's just go through some teaching related fears. So one of the teaching related fears that comes up is I'm afraid I'm going to forget my sequence mid-class or at several points throughout the class. The easiest way to fix this problem, especially if you're literally having it, is simply to use a signature sequence. Now, I have a training video on how to do this, so if you'd like it, just send me a DM on Instagram. Let me know you'd like the training video on the signature sequence, and I'll send it to you. But the idea of having a fear of forgetting your sequence is 100% extinguished simply by leaning into teaching the same sequence over and over again. And even though you might have a worry that your students are going to get bored if you do this, number one, I would say, well, what about the students who really like having the same sequence over and over again? You're going to leave them in the lurch. But number two, the most important thing is for you to feel like you know what you're doing. And so if you let that worry that students are going to get bored drive you to change it all the time, even though the results you're getting is that you're worried and you're fearful and you're actually in the 3D forgetting it, you're literally forgetting it, then the best thing is to take a step back and realize, hey, even though I might be worried some people are going to get bored, isn't it more important for me to actually go into the room and know what the heck I'm doing? And if those students, whoever they are, don't like my classes because I teach a similar sequence from class to class, well, they can go and find a different class. But oftentimes, what comes up around this is the belief that students are going to get bored is just a belief. No one's ever said anything to you. It's just something you picked up along the way, or maybe something that your mind just devised on its own. So, again, just experiment with using a similar sequence from class to class, if not literally the same one. See how you do in terms of being able to remember it more without notes and by walking around. And just like with the other thing we just talked about, over time, you're going to extinguish that fear that you're going to forget it because you're going to have more and more real life experience of remembering it. Okay. The next fear, from a teaching related perspective, I wanted to talk about is this idea of giving incorrect cues. And this can sort of go in the same bucket as students getting hurt. Because a lot of times teachers will say to me, well, I feel like because I don't understand the anatomy, what if I give the incorrect cue and they hurt themselves? So the first thing we need to look at is just the facts of things. There's very little you're going to teach that's going to hurt somebody unless you're doing something that's so far out there, which I know you're not doing. So for the bulk of what you're going to be doing, there's such little risk in terms of you're not using extra weights, you're not putting weight on somebody's body, you're not having them like jump, you're not having, right? So when you just look at functional movement, the risk is very, very low. Now, the other thing is, of course, you don't know what's going on in the student's body. You don't know their medical history. You don't know if they have an injury. And honestly, even if they told you they had an injury, or even if they told you that they had a particular medical condition, you're not qualified to really ascertain what kind of an impact that has on their practice. So let's just put that to the side. So now what you're left with is, well, what does giving incorrect cues really mean? And how can we remedy that? Well, the best way to remedy that is number one, to do the work to learn the anatomy. And I know you know I can help you with that. if you haven't heard yet, and I talked about it at the beginning, of course, the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program is the easiest way to learn the fundamentals. So you can get the link to that program in the show notes. You can get it in my Instagram bio. You can get it on my website. Enroll in that program. I'm going to walk you through everything that you need to know and how to use it in your teaching. So that's number one. Number two, when this idea of incorrect cues comes up and the fear around that, think about using action cues. The clearer your cues are, the lower the risk because it's easier for people to understand what you want them to do. So less words, less complicated cues, less esoteric cues that only certain people will understand if they have a certain level of experience in class. I would even say less Sanskrit, but again, that's up to you. You could say the Sanskrit and say the English. Some of the teachers I've worked with are teaching in a different language than English. So you're going to customize this for you. But at the end of the day, the important thing to keep in mind is to make sure your cues are clear. And then, of course, and this relates to what we talked about before, when you're doing the walk and talk, you have a great way to see if your cues are quote unquote incorrect, meaning if people aren't getting what you want them to do. And by seeing whether or not your cues are working, that's another way to decrease risk because you'll have an opportunity. If you say the cue and see what they do, and they're not doing what you want, you have an opportunity to say it again in a different way. And so these are ways that you can work past this fear around giving incorrect cues. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is this fear of, and these two fears are kind of related. Fear of when you have another teacher come and take your class, like let's say randomly, one of your colleagues, you teach at a particular studio, one of the teachers in that studio all of a sudden is in your class, you realize as you're setting up, and you all of a sudden start to freak out. Oh my God, she's going to judge me. Oh my God, she's got more experience than me. That's another layer that can freak people out. Like, this is somebody that I really admire, on and on. So again, I'm going to go back to that other example I gave you before. When you go and take somebody's class, I would guess that you're just happy to be taking somebody's class. You're not hyper fixated on judging them. You're not evaluating their sequence. You're there to do yoga. So I want you to think about that teacher that's in your class. That teacher's there to do yoga as well. They are not hyper fixated on judging you. And frankly, even if they were, number one, you're probably not going to know about it. And number two, even if it was the kind of thing, and this is such an edge case, such a never would happen type scenario, even if they came up to you and said, which again, this is such a stupid example, I shouldn't even say it, gave you feedback that was critical. Who is that person to be doing that? I mean, you can teach however you want, and that's just that person's opinion. So again, I hesitate to even bring up that scenario because I don't want to overly concern you about it. The most important piece about this is to flip the script and to recognize that when you go and take a yoga class, most likely you're not hyper fixated on the teacher and judging the teacher and watching their body language and all this stuff. You're doing your practice. And so here's another opportunity for you to embody that and to just continue doing what you do in the way that you only can do it. Now, this also sometimes comes up if, there are really experienced students in your class. Sometimes teachers will tell me, oh, I have this class of beginners as well as more experienced people, and I feel like I'm shortchanging the more experienced students because I need to sort of dilute things so that the beginners can do it. So number one, you're running this class. So if you decide you need to take a certain approach, the students in that class are going to, go with what you're offering. So let's say someone like me, let's say I go into a beginner's class because that's the only time I can make yoga fit into my schedule that day. I'm not going to expect that the teacher is going to teach an advanced class. I know it's a beginner's class. Or maybe even it's not even billed as a beginner's class. And I just happen to go to some class and there's a bunch of beginners and the teacher is sort of, offering tons of modifications, slowing it down, whatever it is. I'm a practice yogi. I can roll with the flow regardless of what's being presented. I can, take take value from the practice, even if maybe it's not being presented in a way that I expect. So again, these are the thoughts of mature practiced yogis. And instead of thinking, oh, if I'm teaching this class and there's a handful of more experienced people mixed in with beginners, those experienced people are going to be bored. That downgrades what we know about yoga, right? It almost in a way sort of belittles it. Yoga is on its own, as you know, an amazing practice that doesn't need to be made interesting, doesn't need to be made hard, doesn't need to be made easy. It stands on its own. Otherwise, people still wouldn't be practicing it thousands and thousands of years later. So that sort of hopefully loosens some of these beliefs that you might have about this need to kind of, keep everybody interested. That's not your job. Your job is to teach the class. If they find it interesting, they find it interesting. If they find it challenging, if they find it too easy, if they find it too hard, whatever it is, that is how they perceived it. And of course, from an anatomical perspective, it's based on the physical conditioning, the experience they have with yoga, things like that. These are not things that we can control. So I wanted to just talk about those two kind of together. Now, another teaching related fear that comes up that I hear every now and again is I'm afraid I'm talking too much. And what I will generally say to this is that if you're afraid you're talking too much, you probably are. And one really interesting way that you can test the theory out is the next time you go and teach your class, intentionally talk less, like way less, and see what you notice when you're not talking. Just be in the space of standing there, not saying anything. And if you feel a little uncomfortable, chances are you are talking too much because you're filling in the silence with words to cover up for your own fears around the silence. And this is again a really common thing. It's sort of related to doing the walk and talk and being afraid of people looking at you. Being afraid to be in the room without saying anything is super common. People like to fill in the space with something. That's why a lot of teachers use music because they like to have that sort of background noise filling in the space. But I want you to think about, again, when you go to a yoga class and there's no music and the teacher is not talking all the time, it's probably really um, replenishing to your nervous system. That's like not the right word, but that's the word that's coming to me. I mean, it's probably a very calming thing and probably a wonderful experience for you on the nervous system level. It just down regulates the nervous system when we're in a quiet room. And so I want you to think about that if this resonates with you. I want you to think about that when, again, when you're taking a class, you probably appreciate like a lot of silence, if not just peppered throughout. So give your students that as a gift. I mean, being in silence when we're not sleeping is something we rarely do throughout the day. So think of it as giving your students a gift and giving yourself a gift to start to test the boundaries of what you think you're capable of when it comes to being in silence and starting to realize maybe that, hey, I am the kind of yoga teacher that can be in silence. I don't need to fill the space all the time with my voice. And what you'll come to find, and I had to learn this too, is those moments in class when you intentionally stop talking actually becomes a way for you to downregulate your nervous system, for you to ground into your body, ground into your feet, feel more connected with the class. It's a very, very profound experience and one that I absolutely love. So I encourage you to to experiment with that as well. Now, another thing that comes up that kind of falls into the category of like confidence and visibility is I don't think I sound spiritual enough. This comes up a lot, of course, because yoga has a whole spiritual side to it, and that's grounded in yoga philosophy. And a lot of times yoga teachers will say to me, I'm worried I'm not speaking to philosophy enough. And, the fear around that often is grounded in this idea that I don't really understand yoga philosophy, or even if I do understand it, I just understand it on an intellectual level and I'm not able to just make it easy for people to understand. So the place to start with this is to think about, if number one, if you're having this thought of, I don't think I sound spiritual enough, is that something that you want to be more of, or is it something that you feel like you have to be more of? Because I can definitely tell you, and I'm certainly not holding myself out as the only example, but I'm a very spiritual person, but I don't speak to yoga spirituality in my classes. I speak to functional movement and anatomy. And that's because that's what I love. So my classes reflect what I love about yoga and how I love yoga presented. Now, somebody else, and I certainly have gone to classes like this where people are very into yoga philosophy and very into the whole library of traditional yoga texts that we all learned about in our teacher training. And so they bring a lot of that into their classes, but that's their vibe. That's not my vibe. Now, it doesn't mean that my students aren't getting a spiritual experience. It's just that I'm not literally speaking to it. So the first thing to think of is this something you want to do, or is this something you feel pressured to do? So if you feel pressured to do it, all you need to do is ask yourself, who's pressuring me? And what you'll realize is the only person pressuring you is yourself. And no one is in charge of how you teach yoga. You're the one that can decide how you want to show up in your classes. So if you do feel like this is something I definitely want to do, the easiest way to do it is to simply pick one topic from one book. And I'm focusing on books because that's oftentimes where this lies, but maybe the content you want to share that's on the spiritual side of things is coming from a different place. So whatever it is, whatever's motivating you, just pick one concept. Okay. So let's say I'm going to pick the concept of presence or mindfulness or truthfulness, or, like there's so many, but let's just say presence. That becomes a theme that I weave through the class. But I keep it simple. I just have that one theme in my head. And you could obviously pick a different theme for each class. It's just going in with one theme to keep it really simple. And what you'll actually find is that when you pick one theme, there's lots of different ways in the same class that you have opportunities to speak to that. So it becomes kind of this invisible thread that pulls together all the poses. And this also, as it turns out, tends to be a really good way to take the same sequence, teach it over and over again, but just change the theme of the class. And this can be a way to give the class a little bit of a different lesson or a different vibe, a different experience, without having to actually change the architecture of the sequence. All right, now I want to just speak to a couple of fears that fall into kind of the professional category. One of them is being afraid that you're not good enough to get hired at a studio. This is, again, really common, especially if you're a newer teacher. And know that, when you try to get hired, or when you talk to somebody at a studio, fill out an application, whatever the process is to get hired at a studio, there is, I mean, you can't avoid the component of that, which is you're being judged by someone who's evaluating you. But I want you to keep in mind that whatever the outcome is, that's just that person's opinion, right? Yoga is not the kind of thing where there's a right way and a wrong way. There is how you want to do it and finding a place to teach that's a good fit for you. So this sometimes comes up when teachers tell me they have an audition at a particular studio and they get really nervous about how they're going to approach the audition and what should they do. And I would say in general, whenever you're going to audition for a studio, keep it really simple. This is not the time to make your sequence complicated. Keep it really, really simple so that you have the freedom to really be able to show up authentically and also on a technical level to not have to worry so much about the sequence you're teaching. The other thing, though, is if you do audition for a teaching job and you find that, let's say you get some feedback afterwards and it's not going to work out, they're not going to hire you. Again, keep in mind that's just that person's opinion. It has nothing to do with you and the quality of teaching you can provide. There are a lot of reasons why teachers might not just be a fit for that studio. And furthermore, if the person is telling you you're not a fit, why would you want to teach there anyway? You're just going to go out and find a location where it is a good fit for you and for them. So, this whole idea of I'm afraid I'm not good enough, what is good enough? There really is no standard for yoga teachers. The best thing is to lean into how you want to teach, what you want to offer your students, how you want to come across. And part of that requires that you're really honest with yourself around how do I really want to come across? And am I doing certain things in my classes where I'm sort of holding back or I'm sort of hiding? And those are the things that when you bring them to the surface, which really takes, a commitment to integrity to do. But when you're willing to do that, that's when you really start to develop and grow and you build your confidence because now I'm going into my class and I'm really showing up as me and nothing's holding me back from doing that. So I think that covers it. There's a couple of more, and I might do a part 2 for this episode, but I wanted to just kind of leave you with these thoughts. I'd love to know if there is a fear that you're having that I didn't cover. Send me a DM on Instagram. Let me know because I'd love to do a follow up and really speak to that. There's obviously so many different things that can come up. So let me know for sure if I didn't cover something that's on your mind and I can cover it in a future episode. Now, the last thing I want to just share is an offer, which is if one of these things that we talked about today definitely hit home for you, or maybe again, you have something that I didn't cover and you want some extra support, just send me a DM on Instagram and just say free coaching call. And I'll just hop on a quick Zoom call with you. We can talk through it a little bit and you can get some personalized attention. This is something I do all the time inside my 90-day program. So I'm super familiar with this sort of thing. And maybe you come at it from the perspective of a technical thing that's not working in your classes. And then in talking about that, maybe we uncover there is a fear there. I don't know. It's just something that, we can discuss and see where it leads us. So if you'd like to set up a free coaching call, send me a DM on Instagram and we can set that up. I also am including in the show notes my latest ebook from the interview chair, which is a compilation of a whole bunch of lessons for yoga teachers, along with links to the podcast interviews I've done where I actually spoke to that particular topic. So it's kind of a cool interactive way to present an ebook where you have content you're reading and then you have links to the interviews if you want to go a little bit further and actually absorb the information in an audio way. And then, of course, the last thing is the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program. And as I talked about at the beginning, this is a 4-week program designed to help you learn the fundamentals of anatomy so that you can share it with confidence in your cues and your sequencing. So the link for that is also in the show notes. And you can enroll anytime. There's no, I have to enroll at the beginning of the month or, because there's 4 sessions, do I need to enroll at the end of the month? I do rolling admission, rolling enrollment. So anytime you enroll, you can hop right into wherever we are as a group in the schedule of workshops, and you'll have the replays to watch from the workshops we've done. And then the really cool thing about the format is you can come to any future workshop you want. So regardless of what time in the month you join, you will always have lifetime access to the replays and to coming to any of the live trainings. So with that, we're going to wrap this one up. I apologize. My voice is kind of raspy today. I'm going to have to do a little editing on this episode to get some of the coughing out. But I wanted to stay on track. I've recorded an episode every single week for many, many years, and I didn't want this week to be the one where I missed. So thanks so much for listening. I'll talk with you on the next one. All right. Talk to you soon. Thanks for being here with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And hey, one more thing. While I don't know you personally, I know what a yoga teacher looks like who's ready to have a breakthrough to being the kind of yoga teacher who walks around the room, sharing cues you know the reason for, understands anatomy, teaching signature sequences without notes or any need to practice with class, and loves teaching yoga without stress, anxiety, or nervousness. If you are ready to be that yoga teacher, here is your next step. DM me the words podcast offer, and I will give you a special incentive to work with me inside of my signature program just because you are listening to the podcast. DM me on Instagram at Bare Bones Yoga. I can't wait to hear from you.